Welcome to our video learning journal, where we're going to share the lessons we've learned from 14 foil sessions in 2020. Arbitrarily, we're going to number skills from 1 to 7 in this video, but skill number 1, which would be putting your foil together and getting it into the water, we're not going to cover in this video. Let's get started with skill number 2, which is getting yourself into position and getting ready for the boat to pull you out of the water. When you first get into the water, the foil will be under the surface of the water and the board will be on top. Before you have the boat pull you out, you're going to need to get the foil close to the surface of the water by grabbing the rail of the board and pulling it towards you. You'll also need to get your feet on the board and tell the driver when you're ready to go. Once you have the board in this position, signal to the driver that you're ready and have them pull you up slowly. Our next skill is actually to get up on the board. Once the boat starts to pull you up, stay in a crouched position and keep your arms straight and let the boat do the work. You've probably heard this many times, but truly let the boat do the work. It'll pull you right out of the water and get you on top of the board, which will straighten out because of the foil underneath you. Great, you're out of the water and you're standing up. Your next skill is going to be balancing on the water. Yes, I did say on the water. You want to keep the board on the water for the first few minutes so that you can get used to how it feels, how it moves differently than other board sports you may have tried in the past. As you practice balancing on the water, we hope these 3 tips help you. First, keep the boat around 5 miles per hour or so. That lower speed will help you to keep the board on the water instead of flying up onto the foil. Second, let your backhand off of the handle so that you have better balance. Third, you may find it helpful to be outside of the wake when you get pulled up, or if you're going at a slow speed and you can control the board, try to steer it outside of the wake, outside of behind the boat. The turbulence from the prop or the wake itself can make the balance a little bit more tricky when you're first starting. So those are our tips for balancing on the water. Once you're up and you're doing everything that you can, you're balancing. Notice how your foot inputs have a different feel or kind of a different lag than they do when you're riding a wakeboard or a wake surfboard. It's a completely different feel to be on a foil, and it'll take your body a little bit of time to get used to it. The next skill, once you're used to being on the water, is actually to make the foil take flight, and we call this vertical balance during flight, even though it's really hard to separate vertical from horizontal and all of the other angles that are going to occur. We want to think about one thing at a time as much as possible. To practice your vertical balance and control, you're going to do what we call a touch and go. So you're going to be on the water and you're going to put a little bit of input into the back of the board, into the tail of the board, just by subtly moving your hips or changing a little bit of weight in your feet, and you'll find that the board will gently lift off if you do this very subtly. If you do it with too much pressure, the board will take off very quickly. After you've practiced touch and go landings and feel like you're pretty competent at them, try to keep the foil up in the air for a little bit longer for a sustained flight. We have 2 tips that may help you as you practice your sustained flights. The first tip is about subtlety. On a foil, your movements make a huge difference. We found that just moving our back knee, the knee that's nearest the tail of the board, if we bend it in towards the front of the board, it actually helps keep the foil from going too high. And if we let it kind of bend backwards a little bit towards the tail of the board, it can help us to go up a little bit higher. So our knee, which isn't a very big part of our body, makes a big difference in controlling the height. Obviously the knee's connected to our legs and our hips and everything else. And so you can also notice just the positioning of your hips. Are your hips a little bit closer to the nose of the board, which is going to help keep it down? Or are they going more towards the tail of the board, which is going to make the board and the foil go higher to the point that it could actually breach? You've heard us mention a few times about breaching. Here's what it actually looks like. When you rise out of the water too high and the foil wing itself actually breaches the water, it loses all lift and it immediately slams the board back down into the water. When you breach riding a shorter mast, you actually may not lose complete balance. You might just bounce back down to the water. So it is really important to be able to control your vertical height, but a shorter mast will make it a little bit easier to balance on the board. And when you do breach, it'll help you to land back on the water versus nosediving and completely falling off of the board. Now that you can control your height, the next skill is to balance while turning the board in the air. Here are a few tips. Practice some wide arcing S turns when you first get started. Again, notice your back knee for height and notice your shoulders and your back hand for initiating turns and keeping your balance once you're in the air. At this stage of your learning, you have a lot to think about, but you also have some of the skills so that you can start to have a little bit more fun on your board. I do have one caution for you. When you get close to the wake provides lift to your foil. And the first time you experience it, it may actually throw you off balance. And so you might want to stay in open water away from the boat wake and away from the prop wash so that you're more easily able to just experience the sensations from the board and not from an external force like the wake itself. When you do get close to the wake, here's what's going to happen. If the foil is in a position to pick up power from the wave, it's going to make you generate an extreme amount of lift that will require you to keep more pressure on your front foot so you don't go too high and breach your board. At this stage of your learning, hopefully you're enjoying your S turns. They'll give you a lot of practice in controlling your height and getting used to balancing on the board, positioning your body in the proper way so that you don't fall forward or backwards off of your board. The final skill in this video is to use the wake to generate lift with your foil. Two pieces of information may help. First, you'll notice that the power from the wave actually comes from the base up to about the first third of the wave. Pair that information with information about your wings. So the wings are obviously what generates the lift on your foil. And so you need to have those wings in the power of the wave so that they'll generate lift. If you have a short mast, maybe 15 inches or 18 inches, the foil is probably going to be in the power zone of the wave automatically. If you have a longer mast, maybe 24 or 28 or longer inches, you're actually going to have to rise out of the water a little bit more so that your wings pick up the power of the wave. But let's take a quick step back. You're probably not ready to ride the first wake without the rope. What you'll likely want to do is ride the first or the second wake of the boat, holding on to a wakeboard rope or potentially a wake surf rope. Using all the skills that you've learned up to this point, practice harnessing the power of the wave. Notice what it feels like, notice how it pushes the board and makes it a little bit more difficult to keep the nose down. You'll have to use your S turns to go in and out of the wake so that you can generate speed from the wake and then turn away from it so that you lose a little bit of speed and then turn back into it. For me, this is where foiling all started to come together. I could get that sense of lift, I could start to feel how to position my body so that I could turn properly, and I started getting closer and closer to the boat on the first wake where more of the power comes from. At some point I started to feel ready. I thought I could control the board well enough and I understood how to generate speed, and so I thought it was probably about time to let go of the rope. Before we let go of the rope, I have one more caution. You're likely going to fall quite a bit in wake foiling, and when you do, it's really important to let yourself fall away from the board and away from the foil. I've heard people say don't try to save a fall, and I would agree from personal experience. When you're falling, just let it happen. Try to push away from the board and be aware of those foil wings under the water. They're incredibly sharp. During my 10th foil session, I was turning one way. The board started to go in front of me and I fell backwards. I landed as I fell on the rear foil wing, which slit through my wetsuit and cut into my skin. I didn't think much of it at the time, it didn't hurt, but when I got into the boat, my wife noticed that I was bleeding from my wetsuit. She was able to patch me up and it didn't do much other than scare me a little bit and teach me a lesson that I wanted to share with you. But let's get back to riding without a rope. Here are a few tips that might be helpful to you. You'll notice more than ever that all the little subtle movements make a big difference. The board is super sensitive with the foil beneath it. You'll notice in this video you can see my backhand is out for balance. I'm using my shoulders, my hips, my knees as I initiate turns, and I'm trying to keep those wings in the power zone of the wake. It's not easy, but it is so much fun. It's a never-ending wave, and the peace and quiet of being up there on the wing is amazing. We hope you enjoy your learning process as much as we enjoyed learning ourselves and as much as we've enjoyed putting this together for you.